Hi, and welcome to Faith Talks, a program discussing issues relating to God, faith, and life as we know it. In today's program, we are asking, can you really have a church without walls? We're looking at some of the new and emergent tendency in the Christian faith and in the church structures. In the studio with me, I have Pastor Sam Neves, who is a pastor in Wimbledon, and Pastor Gifford Rhamie, who is a theology lecturer at Newbold College. Now, there was a time when church was a building. You went into church to worship, whether it was Sunday or Saturday, and you went home, and that was church. Now I'm reading about liquid church. I'm reading about the McDonaldization of church. I'm reading about church without walls. What happened?
So there was a time where church was a building,
Yeah.
and people went to it once a week. But there was a time before that time when church was not a building and people didn't go to it. They were the church, and they met in homes and pretty much anywhere that they could meet, and they gathered and they ate, as the book of Acts talks about. So no, we haven't seen a change. We have seen a refocusing, a repurposing. It's not so much that it has changed. It's more like the scales that have been built over the years have come down and have been peeled off by this new generation that is excited to rediscover what church really was in the first place. So that's how I would put that.
But I would argue that even on Jesus' time, he went to the synagogue and temple. So worship has always been centered around a structural building of some form with a group of believers. But what is changing? What are you seeing changing in society?
Church as a building is something that is here and something that is here to stay. And what we're finding, however, is that the times in which we live, there are new voices, there are new needs, new awarenesses, and people are desiring something different, something that would actually speak to their needs in light of their own culture. And so what we are seeing is really a cultural shift away from loyalty and faith in institutions, loyalty and faith in authorities that have a superstructure of churches that are in bricks and mortar, to a situation where people want to focus on relationships. And of course, church actually means a called out people. So you're right, church is about people, and wherever people are, in fact, Jesus himself said, didn't he, where whoever meets in my name, I'm going to be in the midst of them. So wherever people are in the name of Jesus, that is church. But
how would you define, we're talking about church without walls, and you're talking about a relational, it's about people, it's not about bricks and mortar. But surely you need some identification, you need to have some sort of explanation. What is that? What is church without walls? What are all these new things we're seeing?
The actual phrase church without walls comes from an allusion in Zechariah chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, where Zechariah, just as he was about to enter or re-enter Jerusalem, you might remember Jerusalem was overtaken by the Babylonians, and the Jews were in captivity for 70 or so years. And now God had released them, and they were to return to Jerusalem. And Zechariah, the prophet, actually says that God will reign in the city of Jerusalem. It shall be reestablished as a center of God's sovereignty, and it will be a city without walls. That's where the phrase is, and that's where we get the allusion, the idea of church without walls. So it would seem then that even before Jesus' time, God had a vision of his own commonwealth of people, of being surrounded not by walls, because walls are there to either keep people in or keep people out, but by his own presence. His own presence will serve, if you like, as a wall of protection for his people. And his people will reflect all kinds of people, not just a type of people. And so already we see, if you like, in the DNA of God's providence, he designed it so that a future reality would reflect people everywhere and anywhere, not controlled or if you like, hemmed in by walls of division, by walls of race, by walls of ageism, by walls of homophobia, and the list goes on. He wanted a context where people can come to him and have the freedom to leave also.
Sounds very ideal, but as a pastor, Sam, do you not want a church with walls that you know who your members are? You can decide things because you know who they are. You have kind of identified your group, and yes, that means some people are not in the group and other people are. As a pastor, are you not, in England, we are happy to have definitely a roof over our head when we worship. But how do you see this working with a church without walls? Because
and heating and all the rest of it, yes. Now, there was a shift, and it goes even further, and it's more profound than what we think, because in the Old Testament, if you will, God inhabited a building. Make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. God wanted this relationship with us. Now, as we come to the New Testament, and I challenged some of my leaders a few years ago to say, give me just one. Not two or three, just one building in the New Testament that was dedicated to the worship of a church, right? Just one example, and I will be quiet. They couldn't find it because there isn't one. The New Testament church, if you will, the church that Jesus left, it wasn't so much that they wanted to come to God, but they had this profound understanding that it was God coming to them. That God did not inhabit a building called the temple or a sanctuary, but they were the temple. Think about that for a moment, the shift in this mentality and what profound effect this had on them. They were wherever they were, God was there with them. And that changed everything thereafter.
But you can also argue, Sam, quite honestly, that they didn't have the money or the means to build places of worship where they could get together. And as they grew, you kind of need to define worship spaces, because even looking at homes here in England, you can fit 3 or 4 people in a living room, and that's about it. So there is a very practical need for having spaces set aside.
Love it. It's practical. You take a building and you use it. The church is there, and I'm going to make a jump here. I'm going to jump from the building to the institution altogether. And I know this is quite dangerous, especially because my salary depends on it, but I'll go ahead anyway. The church is there, the institution is there, whatever institution it is that you subscribe to be used. It should be used. Every hospital, every school, every track, every magazine, every TV program, including this one that people are watching, should be used. That's the purpose of it. It's not an end in itself. It should be used so that you, as a disciple, as a temple, can now use this in order to inspire the world around you. If it's not to be used, it becomes an end in itself, and then we get into all sorts of trouble when we try to defend the institution, and we miss the point altogether. So this is the danger there.
But I want to challenge you a little bit on the institutional thought here, because throughout history, the church has pushed for an institutionalism to actually preserve the gospel truth. Can you actually have a gospel truth, or can you preserve the gospel message without a church structure?
See, we're talking in 2 ways here. In one sense, we're talking about the literal building of a church, but in the other sense, we're talking about the church in terms of the people. Yeah, and if we're talking about the building, sure, as Sam correctly said, buildings are according to one's needs. If you need a building to protect you from the elements, then sure, you need a building. But you need to understand also, I think we need to understand also, that as the early church emerged, and remember, Jesus didn't leave a Christian church. Jesus actually left Jews behind.
That's right.
All right, and as Pentecost came, and the church grew, they took the principles of Jesus that was that was enshrined in John chapter 4. Remember the dialogue that Jesus had with the woman at the well? And he says that they who worship me must worship me in spirit and in truth. Yeah. So the idea that then was, or the seed that Jesus was sowing then was, that his church will neither be here on Mount Mezarim, where the well of Jacob was, and that's where he was meeting the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. Neither will it be on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. So Jesus already talked about a context where buildings do not matter. Physical space do not matter. In fact, that's transient, if you please. But after the apostolic church, after the apostles died, it seems as though the early Christians had a very transcendent view of God, that God is very distant, and we, his people, must be able to represent the great God that we live via the great temples. And it was an Old Testament concept that the more beautiful and august the building was, the greater the reflection of God. But really, that's not what Jesus was about. And unfortunately, and I would even go as far as to say this, you have to travel past a number of churches before you actually find Jesus. Because it seems as though that the spires have become so high, the windows, stained windows have become so crystallized, the doors have several locks on them, and the edifice are so beautiful that not anybody can walk in these places, and you wonder, where is Jesus here? So the idea of church without walls is not, we're not really talking about buildings per se. We're not talking about physical walls per se, although there might be an argument for that. We are talking about symbolic walls. What walls are keeping people out of our church?
Yes.
But you actually suggesting, and you were laughing, Sam, that when you mentioned that you have to pass through several churches in order to find Jesus. Are you suggesting, or are you kind of alluding to that church sometimes stands in the way of people actually meeting Christ? What do you say,
Here's
Pastor?
a little parable, right? There was this village, and they lived near the sea, and the ships wrecked all the time near the sea. And so the village would come, and they would take those that were wrecked, and they would feed them. They would try and create little tents for them and take care of them until they could be on their way. And then they had an idea, let's build this little tent here so that they can come in and we can rescue them from the cold. Now that grew, and they said, let's build something bigger. And they carried on building a bigger and bigger structure until they had bricks and mortar, and it was beautiful. But this happened twice a year, the shipwrecking. And so what they did is that they for the rest of the year, they said, we need to reappropriate this building. And so they put a nice carpet and chairs, and it was absolutely stunning. And then they were having a meal one day when there was a shipwreck, a couple of generations after, and the people came from the ship down to the beach, and they were at the beach, and the people inside went to the window and watched and said, we could help them if only they wouldn't ruin the carpet. What was a building structure, an institution that was supposed to have a purpose, now became an end in itself and lost its meaning completely. So yes, I think that you can go from various disciple to disciple to disciple before you actually meet one that understands they are the church. Take this. I'm part of the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. I'm the Seventh-day Adventist minister. And I love that for various reasons. What I would love to see is the 17, 20, 25 million people that come together every Sabbath to worship, to actually understand that church starts when the service ends. And so as they leave, they go to their jobs, and they go to their schools, and they go to their neighborhoods, and they become the hands and feet of Jesus. They become his body, one writer would have said. Now, can you imagine this? Now, let's go further. Let's imagine the 600 million Pentecostals, many of whom are watching your program right now, if they understood that church started when the service ended. Imagine the revolution to this world. Now, imagine over 1 billion Catholics understanding that concept. A third of the world would now be the hands and feet of Jesus to an extent that is unprecedented in the history of humanity. Nothing would be the same thereafter. Can you see how the walls are blocking us? Because once you close that space, when they go out into the world. And we have this division, okay? And I don't know how we're going to break this in the future. And this is one of the things that concerns me the most, right? Our young people especially, okay, 25 and younger, they have this idea that there is the world and then there is the church, okay? And the two shall never meet. And so they have this vision that they came from the world and now they are in church. To an extent, I can understand what that means. But it also means that they tag things. Oh, this song, well, that's definitely worldly, and this is definitely Christian. And so you have very bad music. Just because it's got the gospel label on it, it becomes good. And amazing stuff that happens, which we tag worldly, and we miss the point altogether. How are we going to face the future if there is no wall between the two? I don't know, but I'm worried. I'm worried that we have a whole generation that believes that once a week they see God inside this building. I would say Adventists on the 7th day in the morning after 10:30. But that's a different story. And how do we take that out of their minds, that it's not just a slice in the pizza, that everything is church, because they are there. They are the church.
I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, there's also a lot of younger people, I guess everybody under 25 is younger, who have this drive for symbolism, who are searching in their faith, for something very symbolic to hang their faith upon, to hang their belief on, living it out, being it lighting candles or kneeling in prayer, or those kind of orthodox old symbols that kind of identified what church was before. Today, in many of the evangelical churches, we don't have as many rituals as in more Orthodox or Catholic churches. But there seems to be a desire among young people to be able to identify with that. How does that balance with a church without walls that seems to be more liquid and more kind of undefined?
Well, we are creatures of habit, and that is by design. We love rituals because rituals are a way of remembering, and symbols are really a means to understanding, and a means for meaningful understanding. But that's all what symbols are. A means to an end. They're not an end in themselves. And the struggle that we sometimes have is we engage almost on autopilot with these rituals, that we forget sometimes why it was installed in the first place, and why and what is the actual function of the symbol. And symbols change. They ought not to be the same symbols thereafter. We need to be thinking outside of the walls about meaningful symbols that people can identify with, and that are not necessarily identified with church and its liturgy.
But I also, a lot of people will sit and say, well, my identity has certain boundaries because I'm not everything, I'm not everybody. And my church will have to have some natural boundaries, imaginary walls or because otherwise how can I identify, how can I know that this is my church if everything is liquid and I'm comfortable with where I am, my pew and the third pew down and the fourth seat in.
That's all right for some. But if we're really going to reach the masses, we need to stop thinking, we need to get out of this siege mentality or fortress mentality. The idea being that they are strong walls, thick walls. Outside of the walls is Babylon, and ever so often we may go on a fishing expedition, maybe once a year or twice a year if you're lucky, and you go out and you take your rod and you catch some people and snatch them from Babylon, and you bring them in the fortress and you close the doors quickly and you lock them up with several padlocks, and you tell the new converts to be totally dissociated from their friends, to cut off the kind of contacts they used to have, and so on. But that is not a biblical concept. That is not a Jesus concept. Jesus said, we are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. Now, if you take that symbol, for example, the whole notion of being salt, that means we ought to be out there, you know, organically out there. We need to be confident in our own relationship with Jesus sufficiently to be able to affect other people, to transform other people's lives. And remember also that we ought to be known for who Jesus is. So sure, boundaries are important, and people in their relationship with God do develop their own boundaries, and the church organization does help with enabling us to think that through. But we've got to be careful that those boundaries don't become a barrier or become walls to offset other people coming in. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but how does that live out in practicality? Because we can sit and talk about that in theory. How does that look practically for you as a pastor, Sam?
Just as you've answered that, because I was speaking with Sam about a year ago,
right,
and he shared with me something that happened in his church. He wanted them to identify the whole concept of church, and he took them on this. Do you remember? You took this on this excursion, and they had a map, and they had to identify a number of things. And one of the things they had to identify was the church. Do you remember? And only one group. Yes.
No, actually, it was worse than that. We had a 6-hour Bible study because among the elders, silence in my sanctuary, reverence in my sanctuary was so strong in their upbringing, in their understanding of who God is, that they could not think of this building as a multi-purpose building. So no drinking, no eating, and therefore a meal within this building was something that was beyond their understanding. They couldn't grasp it. So it had a 6-hour Bible study. And in the end of the Bible study, we demonstrated through the entire Bible, the whole thing. It was 6 hours, right? In Greek and Hebrew, the original languages and so on. And in the end, it was clear for everyone to see that this building was not the sanctuary. So one of the guys puts his hand up and said, "Pastor, you do what you will. This is the sanctuary." and do you see, I don't expect that generation to actually grasp this new concept or this ancient concept. What I do expect is for them to release and unleash the new generation to do it. Because what that creates is this. I have an accountant who comes to me and says, "Pastor, I'm thinking of leaving my job to enter ministry." And I'm thinking, let me understand this. You're leaving an office where there are 16 people that are hurting. And you want to leave that in order to do ministry? How ludicrous is that? The kingdom of God is not here or there, but it's within you, Jesus said. There's this gruesome picture, which actually will stay in your viewers' minds for a while, but I want to put it out anyway. It's like, sorry to put it this way, it's like manure. Okay? When you have manure spread across a field, it's beautiful. Things are born and it's fantastic. There's a whole field of life comes through. But when you take all that manure and you put it in a pile that never leaves that pile, and then you say to people, "Come and jump inside here," suddenly it's not that attractive and does not bring life, it brings death. This is what a church looks like if it never leaves this building. That's it, and it's ugly.
And the experience I was actually jumping to was, can you imagine you're going on an excursion and maybe a tour somewhere in London, and you're asked to identify certain monumental places within London, and there are 10 places that they ought to identify, 9 of which everyone passes, but there's no church. They don't pass any church. And then you ask the group at the end, or the groups, did you find a church? And they all said no. But one of them suddenly
Yes, I remember that. Sorry, you're right. Different
but one of them has the inspiration and suddenly said, "Yes, there is a church. We are the church." And that really is an upside down theology, that the church is not in the building, but the church is in the people. Yes. And that's what Jesus meant when he said, I think, we are the salt of the earth.
And how do we move that? You know, we're talking about it's not a new idea, it's nothing new under the sun. This whole concept of church being more of a relational than a structural, you know, however we define that. And maybe we as human beings have wanted to put too many definitions on what church should be and shouldn't be. But how do we go from here? Because, you still have to draw a salary from your church leadership. You're just going to go in and say, I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to go out and be among the people. How do we move from the structures?
That's a brilliant question.
How do we move from the structures that does serve some form of function into actually being relevant? Because that's what I'm hearing you saying. We're not relevant in the structure.
Right. That defines my job. My job is to get my members to understand that they are ministers. Now, this is where I see it, okay? Go and dry people's tears that are crying. Go and listen to the old ladies telling stories of their husbands going to war because nobody else wants to hear those stories. There is enough strategy. You don't need strategy for drying tears. You just put your finger out like this and you dry it. Ministry is simple. You see a need, do it. Generosity, be generous. Patience, be patient, and just live out the Spirit. And incidentally, that's what it looks like when a disciple really follows. They become joyful and loving and compassionate and forgiving and kind and generous, and they have self-control. That's the end game of Christianity. Incidentally, I don't know anybody, Christian or otherwise, who does not want to live a life of love, compassion, generosity, and self-control. Everybody wants to get here. A Christian simply knows who to follow, because everybody's following somebody. A film, a magazine, we live in the celebrity culture. Well, I decided to follow Jesus, and that's what I will try my best every day to do. No strategies. You see a need, you meet it. That's it.
So, but this following Jesus, it's all very well, you were talking about individual faith. The Bible is also very clear in talking about the fellowship of the believers, the importance of community. Where does the word community fit into the whole church without walls structure, the whole it is my needs and I need to meet your needs, and that individualism that seems to be very, very key in the concept that we are seeing of the new churches? Where does fellowship, where does community come in?
You can't have an understanding of love unless someone loves you. You can't understand what forgiveness looks like unless someone forgives you. You can't be a church at home by yourself as two or three are gathered. You cannot do that. If you're listening, people are listening at home and they think they can, I'm sorry. You need somebody to be compassionate to you so that you can understand what that means. So, yeah.
And the beauty about our church is that we have a group of wonderful people, talented people, gifted by the Holy Spirit, who I believe, if they could only be sensitized to their own potential, that people are not waiting necessarily for a years-long Bible study or to be in some catechism class or whatever. They want what you have, and they want it now. And I believe people have a right to have the joy, the love, the redemption that I enjoy in Jesus Christ. They have a right to have that now. And we have to somehow allow that to be worn on our sleeves. We have to somehow allow that to just be our lived reality, so that when people do come into contact with us, they would say, wow, there's something about you, there's something that you have, and I want that. And I should be able to say, you know what, you can have that now. You can have that now. All you need to do is find it within yourself to believe that Jesus is your Redeemer, your Savior, that Jesus can transform your life, and you can get that instantly now. So in a sense, the church does provide disciples who are maturing in love, in order to demonstrate the power of the transformative life of Jesus Christ. And in a sense, that reality is there for everybody, but we just need to realize that. We need to realize that people are no longer wanting to join big institutions and to have figureheads to determine their own spirituality. That spirituality should be evident in our common lives now.
I'll go even further. So my wife and I come back from the hospital, and our neighbor, Jane, turns up with food because she knew we would be hungry. I would go as far as saying that the kingdom was already within Jane without her acknowledging Jesus Christ. Because we have this thing, like, unless you acknowledge, it cannot possibly come from God. When Jesus sent the 72 disciples, he said, go to a house and say peace. If a man of peace is in that house, he will welcome you. Question, was peace there before they arrived? Yes. The kingdom was already there, fully growing there. The kingdom is like a mustard seed, by the way, color of your nice jumper. But it's like a mustard seed that grows. If that's the case, I can see that everywhere, and I just informed them. Did you know that you did this? That tonight you were the hands and feet of Jesus to serve us, whether you believe in him or not is irrelevant at this point. And people are willing to engage with that, because what they expect from Christians is, unless you're into our walls, you're going to burn in hell. As it turns out, this was not the message of Jesus too strongly. So, without walls, yes, by all means.
And this continuity between people who have a declared walk with Jesus Christ and people who have an undeclared, you know, they're doing good as they could, but not realizing that their power is derived from Jesus Christ. This continuity ought to be made apparent in as many different contexts as possible, and the church can facilitate that. And I believe that is a major role for us in the 21st century.
Well, I want to say thank you to both of you for a very lively and a very good discussion here. And I want to say thank you to you for watching. And if you have been affected or want to comment on any of the issues raised in today's program, why don't you join us on Facebook or send us an email? Until next time, thank you for watching.